almost like a superpower really, because I was loving being a quadruple amputee. Love it. I was never happy being that Alex Lewis with legs and arms. I should have been absolutely made up. I had no lust for life. I was listless. I didn't know what I was doing. Falling ill was a saviour really, and I was freaking out. I said, we have to escape, we've got to get out. I'm just going to start amputating my limbs. Stressed and worried and scared, really scared. My name's Alex Lewis. I've gone from being a stay-at-home father and a pub landlord to losing all my limbs in 2013 and having facial reconstruction. I now run a foundation and a trust assisting those people with disabilities who need assistive technology. This is my story. I had an amazing childhood. I was very fortunate and privileged. I went to a prep school, I had a very good education. Unfortunately, I'd squandered that education, didn't really put my mind to anything, didn't focus, and I sort of drifted through life as a decorator to becoming a builder, to ultimately meeting Lucy, who was a saviour really, and she tried to put me on the straight and narrow until 2013 when I fell ill, and that's when our lives were turned upside down. At that point I was running a pub in a little village. I was a landlord, but I was alcoholic, a stay-at-home father. I had no lust for life, but I was listless. I didn't know what I was doing, where I was heading, and falling ill was a saviour really. It just changed and altered the course of our life. So Strep A, we all carry it. We all have strep throat. I know the Americans probably used our terminology more than we do. I'd never heard of it. I was just suffering with a cold, flu symptoms. I was achy, had a real bad headache. I didn't want to drink, which probably was a sign really that I was that ill. And then one morning, after a couple of weeks, I woke up and Lucy had gone to work. She had we'd just taken on another business at that point. So she was out. My son had stayed at my parents' that night, so he was out. So it was me and my dog, and I remember waking up. I was semi-conscious, lucid. I couldn't really operate my limbs. My arms weren't working. I couldn't put my jeans on. I couldn't put a shirt on. I didn't know what was going on, what was happening. And I remember a knock on the back door and almost sliding down the stairs. We were living in the pub at the time, and almost arriving at the back door, and then somehow I managed to unlock it. The key was in the lock, and I sort of then stumbled backwards, and then Lucy opened the door, and she was with my stepfather. Their faces just recoiled in horror. My skin was turning purple. My eyes were completely glazed over. I could barely speak. I couldn't really, I could barely communicate. I was in a real mess. And that's when they called the paramedics. And then I was rushed into Winchester ICU. And within the space of about 10 or 12 minutes, I was diagnosed as having Strep A. I'm placed on life support. I've got no idea what's going on. And I was on life support for 4 days. Now, over the course of that period of time, my chance of survival dwindled from about 30% down to 1%. My mother and Lucy were called in on the third night. And he said, look, the chance of him making it through the night are very, very slim. You need to go home to prepare to say your final goodbyes in the morning. But the ICU consultant who was looking after me, he had heard of a trial in the US at the time that was being used on Strep A sufferers. It was just an inordinate amount of steroids in the end. It would probably kill a normal human being. But because I was so ill, it kept the strep at bay, and it sort of almost tried to stop it in its tracks. And then the following morning I woke up. I had a few more days in Winchester ICU, not knowing what on earth had gone on. But I think in my mind, I had it that I was perhaps getting better. I was on a route to recovery. And they said, look, we can't continue your care here in Winchester. We'll move you to Salisbury. They wouldn't say why that was. I went into a private room. We were all unawares as to what was going on. And that's when I met my plastic surgeon, Alice Crick, and she delivered this kind of knockout statement that she was definitely going to amputate my left arm above the elbow. she was definitely going to amputate my feet and ankles, but she felt she might be able to save my knee joint. She was definitely going to try and rebuild my right arm to try and keep a hand with limited function, as that was deemed to be key to my future independent living. And she was going to rebuild my face with a portion of my right shoulder, rebuild my arm with my left shoulder. And then she kind of walked out of the room, and I'm just lying there thinking, I must be on drugs. She didn't say that, surely. And then I remember my best friend coming in, and I was freaking out. I said, we have to escape, we've got to get out. She's going to start amputating my limbs. I was just going mad, and I was stressed and worried and scared, really scared. It was this awful, awful period where we were just bewildered at what was going to happen. I was sedated that night, and the following morning I was prepped for surgery, and the amputation started. Unfortunately, I lost both legs above the knee, which was, we were gutted about that, obviously. The right arm surgery was deemed successful at the time. Unfortunately, I was to break my arm about 7 months after that procedure, and Alex rebuilt my face, which was a series of really grueling psychological surgeries, really, to try and rebuild my face, as it had all gone black. My nose was black, my lips were black, ears were black, my legs were black, arms were black. I was in a mess. I've had about 135 hours of surgery, amputation to skin graft, nerve block, fusing of nerves. The facial surgery was awful. It started off as a huge piece of skin sticking out of my face, and over time it was slowly sort of thinned out. All the skin from my back and my stomach is now on my legs. My left shoulder is in the remainder of my right arm. My right shoulder is on my face. So every available piece of skin that I had on my body has been moved around to compensate. I think that the mental impact didn't really hit home until somebody sat me up and I could see my reflection in a mirror in the room. I didn't recognize the man looking back at me. My little boy Sam, he came to see me on Christmas Day 2013. I was desperately looking forward to seeing him. His eyes met mine, and he hid behind Lucy's legs. Couldn't get his head around what he was looking at, who he was looking at. All I wanted to do was give me a cuddle. I was just desperate, and he wouldn't do it. That's probably the lowest I've ever been in my life. Arrived in Winchester ICU, probably 30.5 stone. And when I left Salisbury in the June of 2014, I was 5.5 stone. Just a sort of shadow of my former self, really. So the rebuilding process it'll be forever. If I had gone to see my doctor prior to being rushed into ICU with my symptoms of flu, feeling a bit rough, he would take one look at me and say, well, A, you're an alcoholic, so what do you expect? You don't eat correctly. Your lifestyle is pretty poor, so you're going to feel bad. You're going to feel terrible. He would never in a million years have thought that I'd contracted Strep A. And I was kind of pleased in a way that we couldn't have done anything about it. Me at that point, I was on really thin ice with Lucy, to the point that I would have been kicked out, I think, if I hadn't fallen ill. When I was rushed in, obviously she stayed by my bedside. She was just so stoic. A good friend of ours came up to me and he said, look, I know about you and Lucy in the last few months, been a bit rough. I'm going to have to ask her that question that you won't ask. And I know exactly what he meant when he said it. Do you still want to be with him? You didn't sign up for quadruple amputation, illness, a life that's going to be really, really hard. Her remark was, I love him. I'm not going to walk away. The next thing she said was, I didn't fall in love with him because he had legs, or because of his legs. It's a really corny comment. He came back to the room and he was giggling, and I was like, okay, so is that a good thing? And he's like, yeah, no, you're right, she's staying. If she had have left, I dread to think where we would be now. You know, would I have a relationship with Sam as good as I've got it now? Probably not. Would I have been able to do anything in the last 10 years that I've done without her? Highly unlikely. You know, just knowing that she had my back through it all was like a drug in itself, really, to sort of keep me going. Knowing that there was life on the outside waiting for me. Everyone pulled together when I needed it the most, but she's the glue. The beginning of recovery was about March, when I'd had all my skin grafts done and they were finished. So there was physio in the morning, and you were learning to shuffle off beds, or, you know, climb from a bed onto a wheelchair, and, you know, all these things. But you were so weak. It was really tough. In my head, I was going to be a burden to Lucy and Sam. I was going to cause unwanted and unneeded aggravation, frankly. My best mate, who was living an amazing life in Courchevel on the Alps, he would fly and see me every 2 weeks. But when it came to me going home, I was scared stiff, and he flew in for the last weekend, and he could see that I was, you know, visibly panicked and stressed. And he said, you know, you don't need to worry about it. You're going to go home, be with Lucy, be with Sam. It's going to be amazing. You're going to get well, and you're going to carry on living a life. And I said, but mate, I can't do anything. I can't do anything independently. I can't eat independently, couldn't drink independently. He said, you don't need to worry. And I was like, mate, honestly, I know you're relaxed, but I do need to worry. And then he said, you know, you don't understand. I'm giving up my job in Courchevel, and I'm going to move in with you, Lucy and Sam and the dog, and we're going to figure it out. Then 2 days later, he packed up my bags, and I left Salisbury. Chris gave up 6 months of his life to live with us, and we did figure it out. You know, what he gave up and what we accomplished in that 6-month period was phenomenal in hindsight. Very lucky to have him. He's a diamond. The recovery process was very focused on rehabilitation and going into London to learn to walk. Massive focus on walking. But there was very little focus on arms. It's one thing being able to walk to a kitchen worktop, but what if I get to the worktop and I can't operate the coffee machine? I struggled with the rehabilitation and the mindset around it. I couldn't really get stuck into it because, A, I was worried about my face. If I'd fallen over or damaged my face, there was no other bit of skin available. There was no plan B. In the July of 2014, I was to break my arm. I couldn't feel the break. So when I woke up, my hand was literally down by my elbow. In my plastic surgeon, Alex Craig. From that sort of ice cold first meeting that we had, over a period of time, we got closer and closer and closer. And she was like a guiding light, really, for me. When she came in to see me with the results of what happened to my arm, she knelt down in front of me and she was crying. I knew what she was going to say next. She goes, look, we can try and pin it, we can try and put rods in it, we can try and save it, but it means 2.5 years of you not being able to progress. You won't be able to learn to walk. No mucking about on the floor with your son, no mucking about with the dog. I mean, life was almost going to stop. And then she said, or we can amputate. And I immediately said, let's amputate. I'm not going to hold up my life anymore. 2 days later, I was back in and my arm was amputated. But what we didn't realise was the arm was so frail because Strep A was in the bone. If I hadn't have broken it that night, I probably had about a week before I would have had to have lost my arm to my shoulder. And if I hadn't picked it up in around 10 to 12 days, the likelihood was that the strep would have got to my heart and killed me. So breaking my arm at that random point was probably the greatest bit of luck that I've ever had. From now on, we were just going to do everything in our power to enjoy it, get stuck into it, learn about it, and do as much as I possibly could. Just live for the moment, really. My son, he was the reason that I had more fight in me than I ever knew. And Lucy, you know, I did it for those two. I was going to do everything in my power to prove to them that I could cope with quadruple amputation, that I could forge a life with it. At that point, I didn't know what I was going to go on to do, but I just took every opportunity that came my way. So if someone said to me, do you want to go skydiving? You know, when I had legs and arms, I'd never have done it in a million years, but because we got so close to dying, it was like, well, it's a cliche now, but it was like, yeah, why not? Let's give it a go. Then it became kayaking around the southern tip of Greenland. Then it was public speaking at schools and businesses and colleges, and then it was kayaking in Africa. You get to a point where you're living this incredible life. It's amazing. It's full of adventure and it's just really cool. But all you're doing is personal development. I wasn't actually doing something to make a difference for others like me. In around 2016, maybe early 2017, I had another shift in my outlook. And the more you travel, the more you realise how fortunate you are that you have the NHS, that you have wheelchair services, you have rehabilitation, you have access to prosthetics. They might not be great prosthetics, but there is things available. That isn't the case globally. So I think it became a bit of a mission that how do we balance that out? And that set me on a path, understanding the needs of amputees like me, people with disabilities. And I started to realise that actually I had a bit of almost like a superpower really, because I was loving being a quadruple amputee. I love it. In hindsight, I was never happy being that Alex Lewis with legs and arms. I should have been absolutely made up. But I think deep down I wasn't. But I never really understood why. And I probably never will understand why. It's been the most wildest ride. The ultimate so far was the Ethiopian trip. We enhanced a facility over there that made wheelchairs. We saw guys dragging themselves on wooden blocks. We were involved in a project at Southampton Uni where they were developing a four-wheeled solar-powered battery-assisted hand cycle for me, and I was going to cycle through the Simien Mountains and then ultimately climb Ras Dashen, their highest peak. That was the real changing point where we could actually leave something behind of benefit. We could link Southampton University with the University of Bahadar. We could forge relationships and ties with Ethiopia. So we weren't just parachuting in, leaving some money and getting out. We were leaving something behind that we could support. Climbing the highest mountain, yeah, it was great, but it was never about that in my eyes. It was always about the impact that we could have in Ethiopia in terms of developing affordable wheelchairs, showing people, communities that feel that disability should be hidden away, that we were proud of what had gone on. We went with an amazing lady called Emma Bett, who was double amputee, and she would have been discarded by her tribal elders as a child because she was of no benefit to their community. And she was this absolute athlete that sort of put me to shame. We need affordable assistive technology. We need better wheelchairs. We need better prosthetics. It has to be global access, not just access in the UK, not just access in the US. It has to be for everybody. And that's kind of the message that we shout about now. Every talk that I do at schools or businesses, it always ends on the same line, that if any of you had the ability to give me my arms and legs back, I wouldn't take them, because what I've achieved in the last 10 years far outweighs what I achieved in that previous 33. It's such a life less ordinary, but I love it.